It's your rep for the big game, hot hot. I'm going neat.
Bring the big game to life with the latest and greatest tech from Best Buy.
Joining us now, former Vancouver Canuck TSN hockey analyst, the one and only Frankie Corrado. How you doing, Frank?
I'm good. How you guys doing?
Yeah, very
Nice.
well. I know you saw some of the game last night. What did you make of the decision to play the young goaltender, Arturs Silovs, and what did you see out of him?
It's a young goalie, man. It's interesting when you see a young goalie get that opportunity. It kind of brought me back. Do you remember it would have been the end of the year, the lockout year, and we went into a game in Edmonton, and we didn't dress much of our roster. We were going into the playoffs. We were going to play San Jose, and we got lit up. And at one point during the game, I think media members were thinking, is Joe Canada going to get into this game, right? And I think a lot of people were disappointed that he didn't, just because the game was so far gone and the kind of game it was. It was the game where all the Edmonton guys hit their performance bonuses, and they were bouncing into the glass, right? Like they hit $1 million performance bonuses. And so it kind of brought me back to that a little bit. But listen, I think when you put a young goaltender in that position, you must really believe in him. Like you really believe that he deserves that opportunity. He's done enough to show you that he's earned it, all that kind of stuff. So I think it's cool from a young goaltender's point of view to have that confidence, from your organization and all that stuff. But man, that's a tough team to play behind of if you're a young goalie trying to find your way in the league. So we just did I did a Sens game this past week, and Kevin Mandolese, I should say, made his NHL debut. And in the pregame, we were talking about how the Ottawa Senators need to find a way to make this game as easy as possible for this young goaltender. Understand it's predictable. The shots are coming from 1, 2, or 3 lanes. There's no sticks. There's no tips. There's no screens. There's not a lot of east and west. There's not a lot of north-south kind of stuff. And to that kid's credit in Ottawa, he played excellent. But the Sens did a pretty good job of that. It was against the Islanders. Like they did a good job. When you watch the kid go in net last night, you're thinking, oh man, like he doesn't have a lot of chances on many of these things, like east-west backdoor plays. You're like, okay, it's hard to fault the kid, and you never would because it's the first game of his career, but it's just a hard spot for him because it's like that's not a team that makes life easy on any goaltender. Thatcher Demko, who's one of the best goalies in the league, like he's got his work cut out for him every single night in front of them. So I wonder what's the rush to get him into that opportunity. I know Spencer Martin, Colin Delia, like you think, what's the difference, right? Like just put someone else in. Yeah, maybe with a goaltender, you think there's a little more long-term thinking involved. Like, hey, let's wait till we've shored up a few things. If we really think this is the goaltender of the future for us, before we put him in a spot where he might be in over his head. But listen, from a player's point of view, you're pumped you get that opportunity. It's your NHL debut. It's the culmination of so much hard work and sacrifice, not only for you, for your family as well. So I think that part's really cool. But man, that's a tough team to have to make your NHL debut behind, especially for a 21-year-old.
Have you ever felt like you needed to be psychotherapist, especially the defenseman, because you're back there after a goal generally. The forwards take off and leave you guys there to soothe the keeper.
It all rolls downhill.
Those 2 quick ones go in the first period, and I'm just thinking, if I'm Frank Corrado or somebody, I'm going back there and having a good talk with the kid, settling them down.
Yeah, for sure. Well, okay, so the first one, the Zibanejad goal, when you watch it, you're like, how's that not interference, right? And Maddie, you and I were texting during that, and Zibanejad makes a nice move. It's kind of like the Jason Spezza, where he kind of fake shot and he ends up slipping at 5-hole. That's a slick move. That's going to go in on a lot of goaltenders throughout the league. But I guess when we were looking at that interference and the referees don't call it, if you just get a quick glance, you're like, how's that not interference? But if you had some runway there as far as who owned that piece of ice first, then you would have a better idea of, is it interference? Is it not interference? But regardless, the thing that kind of stands out when it comes to the goals is how quickly nothing turns into something when it comes to chances against the Vancouver Canucks. It seems like It seems like something totally innocuous. It's like, oh, there's the puck. It's at the blue line, and within a second and a half, you're like, wait a second. How'd that guy get so wide open? How did they make that pass across the ice, right? Like that's the biggest thing that's kind of alarming. If you're watching the game and you look down at your phone for some reason and then you hear Shorty and he scores, you're like, what just happened there? Right? Like it happens so quick.
I left the room for 1 minute and my son was like, it's a 2-1 Rangers.
I'm not sure we've had any more brilliantly succint analysis than that, Frankie, on the Canucks this year.
Unfortunately,
when innocuous turns to dangerous in a matter of nanoseconds.
It just happens so quick, right? And that's part of the thing for a goalie. And even like if I'm a defenseman, right? Like I've had many shifts where I'm looking back and I'm going to the bench and I'm like, where did we go off the rails there? How did that escalate so quick? And that's the thing for the goalie. It's like, okay, you want to see the play develop, right? If it's slow developing, you can track it the whole way, especially for, the speed is different. AHL speed is different than NHL speed. And it's not necessarily the players, how they move. It's how quick the plays develop. And so for a goaltender, not only are you making that jump right now, you're making that jump at like a hyper speed level because the plays developing towards your net in front of you are happening faster than they would on, I don't know, pick a team that you like defensively. Like it's happening quicker on the Vancouver Canucks than it does on another team.
Yeah, and of course they lost Oliver Ekman-Larsson early in this hockey game, which forced more load on the other 5 defensemen. Blake, I know you have a big question here for Frankie based on personal experience, so go ahead on this file.
I mean, we've been pouring over this, and this is not because of last night's performance, because it was a brief one, or any other recent one. It is the cumulative judgment of just what do you do with Oliver Ekman-Larsson with 4 more years on that contract, which is not an easy buyout. It's a complicated buyout. Some years of relief, some years of extravagant penalty. So what do you do with Oliver Ekman-Larsson? Well, it wasn't quite that level of contract for the Leafs to deal with, but Stefan Robidas just didn't have a place on the Leafs, and fans and media there coined Robidas Island as he was sent down to the farm to live out the rest of his days.
Who instigated Robidas Island?
Well,
do you remember how that came to pass?
I think it was a little bit of a trickle-down effect. I'm not going to lie to you guys here. So when I got... Okay, here's I'll give you a little backstory here, okay? When you get placed on waivers as a 22-year-old, the first thing you do is you go to Cap Friendly, and you start thinking, okay, who has openings on their rosters? And when I looked at Toronto, I was like, there's 8 defensemen there. Like, you look at some of the names, there was Phaneuf, Gardner, Riley, Robidas. You're like, all right, it's not happening there. They got their guys, right? And so anyways, I ended up getting picked up. And the first day I get there, there's Roby. We had a nice conversation. We had a chat. All was good. I knew he was banged up. He was hurt, but didn't think anything of it. And then we never saw him again. And it was like, I guess I went in the door and Roby was like, we just stopped kind of seeing Roby. And then it was like Robidas Island. And so I guess you could say I may have caused that. Which is alarming a little bit. And then I think the next time I saw Roby, funny enough, he was working in player development for the team. And so I got to camp the next year, and then I see this guy in a tracksuit. I'm like, that guy kind of looks familiar. He turns around. I'm like, hey, Roby, nice to see you, buddy. How you been? It's been a year.
And it worked out well. That story works out well because
of course.
He probably didn't have a great year that year.
I think he was hurt.
I
think he was pretty banged up. Yeah. I think, I don't know if it was a foot issue, an ankle issue. I can't remember what it was, but look, Roby's got his, he got his start in player development with Toronto. Now he's the assistant coach of the Montreal Canadiens. And man, he's done an incredible job there with those young defensemen. If you pay attention to Montreal, they had 4 or 5 rookie defensemen in the lineup at the same time. And not only have they held their own, they've been outstanding at points throughout the season for that team. But it's a little long-winded here, but yeah, what do you do with Oliver Ekman-Larsson? Well, Jim Rutherford talked about they might use buyouts. They might have to. Maybe that's one of the guys you have to use a buyout on. And this is not just Oliver Ekman-Larsson, but when you watch the Canucks on the back end, it is such a pleasure. It's such a treat to watch Quinn Hughes. It really is. The stuff he does, the footwork, the edge work mixed with the puck movement, not a lot of guys are able to do that around the league. But when he's not on, it's so noticeable. And here's kind of where it gets off the rails. things that should be a little more routine, should be a little more quick developing. We just talked about how things are quick developing towards the Canucks net. Well, from their net out, it's slow developing. It's like a puck is kind of behind a forward, so he's got to reach back, stop his momentum, or, like people like to say play fast, right? Coaches always used to say play fast, play fast. Not necessarily talking about speed and how fast you can skate, or, oh, puck's on my stick, I got to get rid of it as quick as I can. It's more, how efficient can we move the puck from A to B and get going up the ice in an organized fashion? And that's where they kind of struggle the most on the back end. And like Oliver Ekman-Larsson, if it's easy play, yeah, it's no problem. But if he's under pressure, it's like, man, like there's just you don't see him beat enough forecheck, let's say, with his puck moving ability, which is something he used to do really well when he was first starting out. I mean, listen, that's why you pay the GM and the president of hockey ops to make those kinds of decisions. And there's other elements involved in making a decision that big, as far as how do you get that contract off the books.
Frank, we've had nearly 10 games here with Rick Tocchet as the head coach. He has been rather blunt. In some cases, you might say harsh in his assessment of the team. He's used slogans like going back to grade school and, guts and things like that. Is there such thing as too old school these days? And as you've listened to Tocchet from afar, how old school do you think he is compared to to the modern NHL coach?
I will agree. There is definitely too old school. Like that for sure exists. That's obvious. I don't think Tocchet is too old school. I don't. I think he's, like we've talked about it before, he's a relationships guy. I think he's fantastic at that, connecting with players on a personal level, on a hockey player level, relating to guys, all that kind of stuff. I actually saw the video, and I got a good chuckle out of it. Was coming out of Canucks practice the other day, and they were doing the very slow-moving D-zone coverage, right? The puck goes to every spot on the ice, and you see the routes that everyone skates. And it seemed a little elementary from the media's point of view, but I got to tell you, it really isn't. It's like a normal thing. Like I've done it on numerous teams, NHL, AHL, you name it, out in Europe and junior hockey. It's like a normal thing to do. Really what it is, it's just a nice little refresher. I think sometimes, like, if you only have so many hours in a day or minutes in a day at practice to hammer things home. So let's say you go a couple weeks where you're really trying to figure out how you're going to create more offense, right? And then that's when coaches say, well, our details slipped in this part of the game. Well, okay, so bring it back. It's super basic. It's easy to digest. Every player runs through it, and they know that's the route. That's the route you need to run. So I kind of like it. It may seem like it's a waste of time, but it really isn't. And then, as far as like the X's and O's, well, I mean, you just, as someone watching from the outside, you only know what you see. So you can see that he's trying to hammer it home in practice. And, hopefully at some point you see it more in a game, but at least, there's a lot of emphasis behind it for a coach who, maybe has more of a reputation as being a relationship guy and, finding ways to get the most out of his players. There's some X's and O's happening.
Lastly, Frank, we wanted to ask you about a former teammate of yours, Kasperi Kapanen. More reports today from Frank Saravelli linking the Canucks with Jim Rutherford and Patrick Allvin's old team, your old team, the Pittsburgh Penguins, on perhaps a Brock Besser deal. We know Kapanen is somebody that the Penguins have been trying to move. It's 19 points in 39 games. Doesn't look like he is going to realize all that potential we saw in 2018, 2019 with the Leafs. Tell us a little bit about Kapanen, and you think if there's more there.
Yeah,
from the winger.
It's interesting.
Blake adores his skating. I remember Blake falling in love with his foot speed.
I love his speed too. I think he's fantastic when it comes to his skating ability, the energy he plays with. I actually can't say enough about Cappy as a guy. I think he's an awesome guy. I really enjoyed being his teammate. Got to play with him in Toronto. All that stuff is great. And it's funny how the league works, right? Because he was drafted by Pittsburgh, got traded to Toronto, and the first opportunity Pittsburgh had to get him back, they did it. They went and got Kasperi, Kapanen back, and now that same group is in Vancouver, and we're hearing, the names are linked again. So they must really see something in Cappy that they like. And, I like the fact that he plays with that energy. He plays at one speed, okay? There's certain guys out there where they play it, they can change gears, and they're really effective, and they're deceptive. He's not that. He's not going to be that. He's not going to wow you with the puck. He's not – I think at one point maybe there was thought that him and Willie Nylander were kind of neck and neck as far as what they were going to be. That's not the case anymore. Like that upside is not going to be there. He's going to be an energy player. He's got some good hands. He's got a powerful shot. But I just think with him playing at one speed the whole game, it's like it's easy, not easy because he's really fast. But, if you're tracking him, you're like, this is the speed. Once I match his speed, we're good. There's no deception. There's no change in it. But he is elusive. He is a pretty dynamic skater. He can cut inside on you. So, there's a really nice package there as far as the player goes. And, you always kind of think back on things the management group has said. Well, maybe there's one of those guys where they look at it and say, well, maybe we can extract the most out of Cappy, similar to how they're maybe thinking with Anthony Beauvillier. And so I like Cappy a lot. But, if you're expecting him to turn into Willie Nylander, then you're going to be disappointed. If you understand that he's going to be really fast, he's going to have some offense, he's going to be really good on the penalty kill, and he'll play with a lot of energy, and you can live with that, then you'll be happy with the player you get.
Dermott, Mikheyev, maybe Kapanen. Do you have Tyler Bozak or P.A. Parento's number they can just recreate the 15-16 Leafs here on in
It's
Vancouver?
quite funny you mentioned those two guys, like Bozak and Parent. Those were two of my favorite guys. Like they were awesome guys. I loved playing with those guys. And listen, I know like Travis Dermott is there as well, and I hope he can kind of find that next step. Like it just feels like he was this player in waiting for Toronto for a long time because, when like I played with him when he first came up with the Marlies and you saw him, he was almost brave on the ice with the plays he was willing to make. He was always willing to push the envelope, and it seemed like he never really sacrificed too much defensively in order to do that. And I know injuries have gotten in the way and maybe, confidence has been shaken a little bit. And that's part of playing in Toronto and the kind of pressure cooker it is. But, Vancouver's no slouch itself in that regard. But Travis Dermott certainly fits that mold as far as a player with a little more untapped potential. It's just the question is, how do you get him to realize that, especially considering he's had the injuries he's had?
Still only 26. He made his Leafs debut. He was a 20-year-old young guy. So he was really ahead of the curve back then, Frankie. You talk about your favorites. You're one of ours, buddy. Thank you for the time here today. We'll catch up soon.
Thank you, guys. Talk soon.